My name is Diane Morrison, and I'm 28 years old. 3 days ago, I received a text message that shattered everything I believed about family. I was sitting in my small studio apartment after working a double shift at the community center where I coordinate programs for underprivileged kids. My phone buzzed, and I saw my brother Kenneth's name. My heart lifted because we hadn't talked in weeks. But when I opened the message, my world collapsed. "Don't come to my engagement party. You'll shame me before her family with your poverty. Stay away." I read it 3 times, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This was my brother, the person who used to protect me when we were kids after Dad died. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for 6 months, saving every extra dollar from my modest salary to buy him a proper engagement gift. Now he was telling me I wasn't good enough to celebrate his happiness. My vision blurred with tears as I stared at those cruel words, unable to process that Kenneth had actually written them. A sudden knock on my apartment door pulled me from my spiral of disbelief. Before we dive into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. Are you Team Diane, or do you think family drama should stay private? Hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated by people who were supposed to love you, and subscribe because this story takes turns you won't believe. Trust me. What happens next will make you rethink everything about loyalty and revenge. My hands were still shaking when I decided to call Kenneth directly. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe someone had taken his phone. Maybe this was some awful joke that would make sense once I heard his voice. I dialed his number and waited through 4 agonizing rings before he answered. "Kenneth," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "did you really send that text? Did you mean what you said?" There was a pause, and then his voice came through the line, cold and distant in a way I'd never heard before. "Yes, Diane. I meant every word." His tone was clipped, businesslike, as though he were rejecting a job applicant rather than speaking to his only sister. I felt my stomach drop as he continued. "Cassandra's family is old money, sophisticated people who move in circles you wouldn't understand. Her father, Graham Wellington, owns half the commercial real estate downtown, and they summer in the Hamptons. Your job as a community center coordinator is frankly embarrassing when I have to explain what my family does for a living." I tried to interrupt, tried to remind him that I helped pay for his college education after Dad died when I was only 16 years old, and should have been thinking about prom instead of funeral expenses and tuition payments. "I worked 3 jobs that year, Kenneth," I said, hearing my voice crack with emotion. "I gave up my own college funds so you could finish your degree." "That was years ago," he replied dismissively, "and things are different now. I've moved forward with my life, and you're still stuck in the same place you were a decade ago." Then he delivered the blow that truly broke my heart. "I've told Cassandra's family that you're estranged, that we had a falling out and you're troubled. If you show up at the engagement party, I'll have security remove you immediately. I don't want a scene, and I don't want them to know the truth about our background." I ended the call and immediately dialed our mother, Patricia, desperate for someone in my family to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. Mom answered on the second ring, and I explained everything through my tears, expecting her to be shocked and angry on my behalf. Instead, there was a long silence before she spoke. "Diane, honey, Kenneth has finally found his place in society, has marrying into a family that can open doors for him that we never could." I felt the ground shift beneath me as I realized what she was saying. "You knew about this?" I asked. "You agree with him?" Patricia's voice took on a defensive edge as she admitted that she'd been the one encouraging Kenneth to distance himself from what she called my lower-class lifestyle. She revealed that she'd been telling the Wellington family for months that I wasn't really part of the family anymore, that I'd made choices that led me down a different path. She made it sound like I'd abandoned them rather than the truth, which was that I'd sacrificed everything to keep our family afloat after Dad's sudden heart attack left us drowning in medical bills and funeral costs. "Kenneth is embarrassed by you, Diane," Patricia said bluntly. "And honestly, I understand why. You could have made something of yourself, but instead you chose to work with poor kids in a rundown community center. You could have married well, but you're still single at 28. You could have presented better, but you dress like you shop at thrift stores. I do shop at thrift stores, Mom, I said quietly. I have student loans from the semester I did attend college before dropping out to support this family. I have medical bills from when I didn't have insurance. I have rent to pay and groceries to buy, and am doing the best I can. Before I could say anything else, I heard another voice in the background, and then Cassandra herself got on the phone. Her voice was honey-sweet but with an undertone of pure condescension. "I'm sure you understand, dear," she said. "This is such an important event for Kenneth and me, and we need everything to be perfect. Graham's business associates will be there, and first impressions matter so much in our world. Kenneth has explained your situation, and while it's unfortunate, we simply can't risk any awkwardness. I hope you won't take this personally." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was being generous by explaining why I wasn't good enough to breathe the same air as her and her family. "The engagement party is in 3 days at the Wellington estate," she continued. "It's a small, intimate gathering of just 200 of our closest friends and family. Security will have your name and photo, so please don't make this difficult for everyone." Then she hung up, leaving me standing in my tiny apartment with the phone still pressed to my ear, feeling completely abandoned by everyone I'd ever loved. My own brother had rejected me, my own mother had sided against me, and a woman I'd never even met had just politely told me I was trash. I sank onto my threadbare couch and finally let myself cry. Deep sobs that shook my entire body. I'd lost my family in a single evening, and the worst part was realizing they'd been planning this betrayal for months while I remained completely oblivious, still loving them and believing they loved me back. The next morning, I met my best friend Ruby at our usual coffee shop downtown, a small place with mismatched furniture and excellent espresso that we'd been coming to since college. Ruby took one look at my face and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. She's a lawyer at a small firm that does civil rights work, sharp as a knife and fiercely protective of the people she loves. I explained everything while she listened with growing fury, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her coffee cup. When I finished, she called Kenneth a social climbing snake and several other names I won't repeat. But then her lawyer brain kicked in, and she started asking careful, pointed questions about the Wellington family. "Do you know what Graham Wellington does exactly?" she asked. I shrugged, said something about real estate. Ruby pulled out her phone and started searching, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through results. "I know that name," she muttered. "Graham Wellington has been involved in some questionable deals. There were whispers about bribery and fraud a few years ago, but nothing stuck." Ruby looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Diane, why would Kenneth be so desperate to impress these people? It's not just about social status. There's something else going on here." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a law office I didn't recognize, and when I opened the attachment, I found a formal letter addressed to me with Kenneth's lawyer's signature at the bottom. Ruby leaned over to read it with me, and I watched her face transform from curiosity to shock to pure rage. The letter demanded that I sign a document agreeing to refrain from contacting or appearing before the Morrison-Wellington families, which seemed excessive but not entirely shocking given yesterday's conversation. But then there was a second page, a family settlement clause buried in legal language that I didn't fully understand. Ruby snatched my phone and read it more carefully, her lips moving silently as she parsed the legalese. When she looked up at me, her expression was a mixture of fury and something that looked almost like pity. "Diane," she said slowly, "do you know anything about your father's estate? About any money he might have left?" I shook my head, confused by the question. "Dad died with medical bills and a mortgage," I said. "There was nothing left after we paid everything off. That's what Mom told me, anyway." Ruby's jaw clenched. She started making phone calls right there in the coffee shop, using her legal credentials to access public records and insurance databases. 20 minutes later, she put her phone down and looked at me with barely contained anger. "Your father had a life insurance policy through his employer," she said. "It matured 2 years ago. The payout was $400,000. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Mom would have told me. Kenneth would have told me. We would have split it. Ruby shook her head. According to these records, your mother was the beneficiary, and she had the legal right to distribute it as she saw fit. But Diane, as your father's children, you and Kenneth should have received equal shares. That money was meant to take care of both of you. I sat there stunned, trying to process what she was saying. $400,000. Split between Kenneth and me. That would have been $200,000 each. That money could have paid off my student loans, covered my medical bills, given me a real safety net. I could have finished college. I could have had choices. Ruby continued her investigation, her fingers flying over her phone screen. She discovered that Patricia had given the entire amount to Kenneth 2 years ago, around the time he started working at a prestigious investment firm and moving in wealthier circles. Kenneth had been living off that money, using it to fund his new lifestyle and impress people like the Wellingtons, while I struggled to pay rent and ate ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. The document Kenneth's lawyer sent me was designed to get me to sign away any claim to that money, probably to make everything legally airtight before his marriage. Ruby explained that Kenneth needed my signature to fully claim my half legally, since there could be questions about whether the money should have been split equally between siblings, regardless of who the technical beneficiary was. That's why he's trying so hard to intimidate you, Ruby said. That's why he's making you feel worthless and unwelcome. He wants you too broken and grateful to question anything. He wants you to sign this document thinking he's doing you a favor by not pursuing legal action against you. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. I'm not an angry person by nature. I'm the one who mediates conflicts at work, who talks teenagers down from fights, who believes in second chances and seeing the best in people. But sitting in that coffee shop, learning that my own family had stolen from me and then gaslit me into thinking I was the problem, something fundamental shifted inside me. Ruby must have seen it in my face because she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "We're going to fix this," she said firmly. "We're going to get you every penny you're owed, and we're going to make sure Kenneth and Patricia face consequences for what they've done. But first, we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." She suspected there might be even more money involved, possibly a trust or additional assets that Kenneth was hiding. The Wellingtons didn't strike her as the type of family to approve a marriage unless there was substantial wealth involved, and $400,000, while significant, wouldn't be enough to impress people who owned half the commercial real estate in a major city. Ruby promised to dig deeper, to use her legal connections to uncover every financial secret my family had been keeping. As we left the coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt since receiving that text message. Hope. Not the naive hope that my family would suddenly realize they loved me and apologize, but the fierce hope that comes from knowing you're not going to take abuse lying down, that you're going to fight back with everything you have. Over the next 2 days, Ruby worked tirelessly to build our case and devise a plan. She called in a favor from an old friend named Marcus Brennan, an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corporate corruption and financial fraud. When Marcus heard about the Wellington family's involvement, his eyes lit up with professional interest. He'd been trying to build a case against Graham Wellington for months, suspecting him of real estate fraud, bribery, and possibly money laundering. "Kenneth and his engagement party might be the way in," Marcus said during our strategy meeting at Ruby's apartment. "If I can get access to that party, I might be able to gather evidence about Graham's business dealings. And if he's involved in whatever Kenneth is doing with your inheritance, that's even better. We can kill 2 birds with 1 stone." I was hesitant at first, exhausted and hurt and not sure I had the strength for whatever they were planning. All I wanted to do was hide in my apartment and pretend none of this was happening, but Ruby wouldn't let me give up. "You deserve that money," she said firmly. "More than that, you deserve justice. Your father worked himself to death to provide for you and Kenneth. He would be horrified to know what Kenneth has become." Ruby's plan was bold and slightly terrifying. She had a contact who worked for the catering company the Wellingtons had hired for the engagement party. Through some creative persuasion and a small bribe, Ruby managed to get me added to the catering staff list under the false name Diana Miller. I would attend the party disguised as one of the servers, which would give me access to the house and the guests without Kenneth or Patricia recognizing me. Marcus would attend as a plus one of a business associate he knew would be there, someone who owed him a favor and wouldn't ask too many questions. He would wear hidden recording equipment and document everything he could. Ruby would remain outside in a car parked near the estate, ready to provide legal support if anything went wrong. For 2 days, I practiced acting like catering staff, learning how to carry trays properly, how to move through a room without drawing attention, how to keep my head down and blend into the background. Ruby's girlfriend worked in hospitality and gave me tips on how servers behave at high-end events. I bought a simple black uniform and a pair of sensible shoes. I practiced pulling my hair back into a severe bun that changed the shape of my face enough that I hoped Kenneth wouldn't recognize me immediately. The night before the party, I almost backed out completely. I sat on Ruby's couch, my stomach churning with anxiety, convinced this plan was going to fail spectacularly. What if Kenneth recognizes me? I asked. What if security checks IDs? What if I get arrested for trespassing or fraud or something? Ruby sat down next to me and took both my hands in hers. Diane, listen to me. You are not the one who should be ashamed. You are not the one who did something wrong. Kenneth stole from you. Your mother helped him. They made you feel worthless, so you wouldn't question their betrayal. You have every right to be at that party, to see what they're really like, to gather evidence of what they've done. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. Her words settled something inside me. She was right. I wasn't doing anything wrong by trying to recover what was rightfully mine. I was doing what anyone would do when faced with fraud and betrayal. I steeled my nerves and tried to sleep, though I tossed and turned most of the night, my mind racing through everything that could go wrong. The evening of the engagement party arrived with beautiful weather, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze. I met Ruby at her apartment and changed into my catering uniform, barely recognizing myself in the mirror with my severe hairstyle and plain black clothes. I looked anonymous. Forgettable. Exactly what we needed. Ruby drove me to the Wellington estate, a massive property in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. The mansion itself was something out of a movie, all white columns and perfectly manicured gardens, with a circular driveway that could accommodate dozens of luxury cars. I checked in with the catering manager, a harried woman named Mrs. Chen, who barely glanced at my fake ID before handing me a tray of champagne glasses. "You'll circulate during the cocktail hour," she instructed. "Keep the trays full. Stay out of the way, and don't talk to the guests unless they address you directly." I nodded and took my position near the entrance to the main ballroom, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Then the guests started arriving, and I got my first glimpse of the world Kenneth so desperately wanted to join. Men in expensive tuxedos, women dripping with jewelry, everyone laughing and air-kissing and speaking in that particular tone wealthy people use when they want everyone to know how important they are. And then I saw Kenneth. Kenneth looked like a stranger in his designer tuxedo, his hair styled perfectly, his smile wide and confident as he greeted guests. This wasn't the brother I remembered, the one who used to make funny faces to cheer me up when Mom was having a bad day, the one who promised he'd always look out for his little sister. This was someone else entirely, someone who moved through this crowd like he belonged here, like he'd never lived in a modest 3-bedroom house and worried about utility bills. Cassandra stood beside him in a stunning designer gown, her dark hair swept up elegantly, diamonds at her throat and wrists. She was beautiful in that polished, untouchable way that comes from a lifetime of wealth and privilege. My mother Patricia was there too, and seeing her hurt worse than seeing Kenneth. She wore an expensive dress I knew she couldn't have afforded on her own, her hair and makeup professionally done. She was laughing with a group of older women, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen her in years. That all moved on, moved up, and left me behind without a second thought. I moved through the crowd with my tray of champagne, keeping my head down and my eyes averted. I positioned myself near walls and corners where I could observe without being noticed. The conversations around me were about vacations in Europe, stock portfolios, country club memberships, These people lived in a completely different world from mine, and I understood why Kenneth wanted to be part of it. What I didn't understand was why he thought he had to destroy me to get here. Then I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Kenneth was standing in a corner with Graham Wellington, Cassandra's father, speaking in low tones they thought were private. I moved closer, pretending to rearrange glasses on my tray. Once that signature comes through, Graham was saying, "We can proceed with the property transfer." Kenneth's response chilled me to the bone. Shell sign. She's too weak to fight me. I've already broken her down enough that she'll be grateful for any scrap of kindness. Graham nodded approvingly. And your mother confirmed the girl doesn't know about the trust fund? Kenneth actually laughed. She has no idea our father left anything substantial. Mother's been perfect at keeping her in the dark. A trust fund. Not just the life insurance money, but a trust fund too. How much more had they stolen from me? I was so focused on their conversation that I almost didn't notice Cassandra approaching them. She leaned in close to Kenneth, her voice urgent despite being barely above a whisper. "Did you confirm your sister won't show up?" she asked. "Daddy said if she makes a scene, if anyone finds out about your real background, the deal is off." Kenneth put his arm around her waist possessively. "I threatened her enough," he assured his fiancée. "She's probably crying in that pathetic apartment right now, feeling sorry for herself." They both laughed, and the sound of their shared cruelty hit me like a physical blow. My hands shook so badly I thought I'd drop the tray. I wanted to scream at them, to throw the champagne in their faces, to tell everyone in this ballroom exactly what kind of people they really were. But I forced myself to stay calm, to keep playing my role. This was bigger than just hurt feelings now. They were criminals, and I needed evidence. My mother joined their little group, and I moved even closer, desperate to hear everything. Patricia spoke in a conspiratorial whisper. "I've already drafted a letter for Diane to sign, giving up all claims to family assets. Once I get her to sign it, everything will be settled legally." Cassandra smiled approvingly. "Perfect. Once we have her signature, Kenneth and I can access the full trust. Then we'll cut contact completely, and Kenneth will finally be free of that embarrassment." Kenneth looked almost gleeful. "Exactly. No more having to explain my charity case, sister. No more worrying about her showing up and ruining things. I can just tell people, I'm an only child." The casual cruelty of that statement, the ease with which he was willing to erase my entire existence, broke something inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my brother wishing I'd never been born, about my mother helping him pretend I didn't exist, about all of them treating me like garbage they needed to dispose of quietly. I was so absorbed in their conversation, so focused on memorizing every word they said, that I didn't notice another guest walking backward while talking to someone. He bumped into me hard, and my tray tilted violently. Champagne glasses slid off and shattered on the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the entire ballroom. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned, including Kenneth's. For one horrible, frozen moment, I thought he recognized me. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw them narrow slightly as if something about my face was familiar. My heart stopped beating entirely. But then he just sneered dismissively at the clumsy staff member and turned back to his conversation, clearly considering me beneath his notice. The catering manager, Mrs. Chen, rushed over, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Clean this up immediately," she hissed at me. "If you break anything else, you're fired." I knelt on the cold marble floor in my black uniform, picking up shards of broken glass with my bare hands, feeling utterly humiliated. Guests stepped around me without acknowledging my presence, like I was a piece of furniture or a stain to be avoided. I was invisible to these people, less than human. And somewhere in this crowd, my family was celebrating their success at destroying me. Then Marcus appeared, crouching down as if to help me clean up the broken glass. His hand closed over mine for just a second, and he whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I got all of that on audio, every word. "Keep going." That small reassurance, knowing that someone had witnessed and recorded Kenneth's cruelty, gave me the strength to continue. I finished cleaning up the broken glass, my hands bleeding slightly from small cuts I barely felt. I took a fresh tray and continued circulating, continued playing my role. The party went on around me, oblivious to the fact that their perfect evening was about to come crashing down. After the broken glass incident, I retreated to a quieter corner of the ballroom, trying to steady my nerves and stop my hands from shaking. Marcus had caught Kenneth's admission on tape, which meant we had evidence of fraud. That should have been enough. Ruby would have told me to leave now, to get out while I was ahead. But something kept me rooted in place, some need to see this through to the end, to witness exactly who my family had become. I picked up a fresh tray of hors d'oeuvres and started moving through the crowd again, this time heading toward the hallway where Marcus had mentioned seeing Kenneth's office earlier. If we could access any physical documents, any bank statements or legal papers, our case would be even stronger. I was careful to look like I had a legitimate reason to be heading that direction, moving purposefully as if the catering manager had sent me to check on something. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard a sharp, shocked gasp behind me. I turned slowly, dread filling my stomach, and found myself face to face with my mother. Patricia's champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with recognition and growing horror. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I watched realization dawn on her face, followed quickly by rage. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. Her hand shot out and grabbed my arm painfully, her fingernails digging into my skin through the thin fabric of my uniform. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? Patricia yanked me around to face her fully, and her raised voice started drawing attention from nearby guests. People began turning to look at us with curiosity, wondering what the commotion was about. Kenneth must have heard his mother's voice because he came striding down the hallway, his face already flushed with anger. When he saw me standing there in the catering uniform, recognition hit him like a slap. The color drained from his face, then flooded back twice as red. "I told you not to come," he shouted, loud enough that even guests in the ballroom could hear him now. Conversations faltered and died as more people turned to watch the scene unfolding. Cassandra appeared at Kenneth's shoulder, her perfect composure slipping as she saw me. Her eyes went cold and calculating. "Who is this person?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Kenneth seemed to realize he needed to control the narrative quickly. "This is nobody," he said loudly. "Just confused staff who wandered into a restricted area." But Patricia, flustered and angry, made a critical mistake. "This is Diane," she blurted out. "Kenneth's sister." The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd of wealthy guests who had gathered to watch the drama. I saw curiosity and judgment in their faces, saw them cataloging everything about me, from my cheap uniform to my simple hairstyle. Graham Wellington pushed through the crowd, his expression dark and displeased. This was not the kind of attention he wanted at his daughter's engagement party. Cassandra looked at me with pure contempt, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly. "You were told not to come," she said coldly, her voice carrying across the now silent hallway. Every eye was on us, every ear straining to hear what would happen next. I found my voice finally, though it came out smaller than I wanted. "I came to understand why my own family would betray me," I said. "Why they would steal everything my father left for me and then try to make me disappear." Kenneth moved fast, grabbing my other arm roughly enough to hurt. "You're making a scene," he growled. Security! 2 massive security guards started pushing through the crowd toward us. I tried to speak louder, tried to make everyone hear the truth. "You're stealing my inheritance," I said, my voice rising. "The life insurance money, the trust fund our father left. You've been hiding it from me for years." But Kenneth talked over me, his voice booming with false concern. "She's delusional," he announced to the watching crowd. "She's been mentally unstable for years. We've tried to get her help, but she refuses treatment." My mother joined in seamlessly, her performance worthy of an award. "She's always been troubled," Patricia said sadly, shaking her head. "We've done everything we could for her, but she has these episodes. She makes up stories about money and conspiracies. It's heartbreaking, really. Cassandra added her voice with perfectly calculated sympathy. Mental illness is such a difficult burden for families, she said softly. How tragic that it's manifesting like this. The guests murmured with a mixture of pity and discomfort, clearly believing the narrative my family was spinning. They saw a desperate woman in a cheap catering uniform making wild accusations, and they saw a respectable family dealing with an embarrassing situation with grace. Nobody questioned who was telling the truth. The security guards reached me, and their hands closed around my arms like vices. I struggled instinctively, which only made me look more unhinged. "They're lying!" I shouted, desperation making my voice crack. "I have proof. They admitted everything. Ask them about the $400,000 from Dad's life insurance. Ask them about the trust fund," Kenneth shouted over me. "She's having a breakdown. Please, just get her out of here before she hurts herself or someone else." I was physically lifted off my feet and dragged toward the entrance. I saw Marcus trying to push through the crowd to reach me, but other security personnel blocked his path. Kenneth followed us down the hallway, and when we were momentarily out of view of the guests, he leaned in close to my ear. His whisper was pure venom. "You'll never prove anything," he hissed. "Mother and I will make sure everyone thinks you're crazy. No lawyer will take your case when we're done destroying your credibility. We have money and connections, and you have nothing. We'll bury you so deep you'll wish you'd just signed the papers and disappeared quietly." Patricia stood a few feet away, watching coldly as her daughter was manhandled by security. She didn't intervene, didn't defend me, didn't show even a flicker of maternal concern. She just watched with those flat, emotionless eyes, as if I were a stranger causing problems at a party she was hosting. The security guards carried me through the mansion's ornate entrance and literally threw me down the front steps. I landed hard on the gravel driveway, my hands and knees scraping painfully against the sharp stones. My catering uniform was torn, and blood welled up from cuts on my palms and legs. I looked back at the massive doorway and saw Kenneth, Patricia, and Cassandra silhouetted there, backlit by the golden light from inside. They looked triumphant, powerful, completely in control. Kenneth said something I couldn't hear, and all three of them laughed before the heavy door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I sat there on the cold gravel in the darkness, my torn uniform and bleeding hands a stark contrast to the glamorous party continuing inside. I could hear music and laughter drifting out through the windows. They'd already moved on, already forgotten about me. To them, I was just an unpleasant moment that had been dealt with and dismissed. The humiliation was so complete, so total, that I couldn't even cry. I just sat there in the darkness, staring at that closed door, feeling like the smallest, most worthless person who had ever existed. I'm not sure how long I sat there on that gravel driveway. Time seemed to stop having meaning. Eventually, I heard footsteps crunching toward me, and Ruby's voice broke through my fog. "Oh, Diane," she breathed, and the gentleness in her tone finally broke something loose inside me. She helped me to my feet carefully, as if I might shatter at any moment, and guided me to her car. We drove back to her apartment in complete silence because there was nothing to say. Everything had gone worse than we could have imagined. Not only had I failed to get additional evidence, but Kenneth and Patricia had successfully made me look unstable in front of 200 influential witnesses. Ruby helped me inside and settled me on her couch, bringing a first aid kit to clean the cuts on my hands and knees. I sat there like a doll, letting her tend to my injuries without really feeling anything. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of what had just happened. "Maybe they're right," I finally whispered. "Maybe I should just disappear like they want." Ruby's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping around my palm. "Don't say that," she said firmly. But I continued as if she hadn't spoken. "They have money, lawyers, social connections, everything. I have nothing. I'm just making things worse by fighting. Maybe I should just sign whatever they want and let them win." Ruby tried to talk sense into me, but I couldn't hear her through the ringing in my ears. All I could see was Kenneth's triumphant face as I was thrown out, my mother's cold indifference, the way those wealthy guests had looked at me like I was trash. That night at Ruby's apartment was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself being dragged through that mansion, heard Kenneth calling me delusional, felt the impact of hitting that gravel driveway. I kept replaying the humiliation over and over, each repetition grinding me down further. The next morning, Marcus showed up with his recording equipment, excited about the audio head captured. But when he saw my state, his enthusiasm died. I was still in the torn catering uniform, sitting in the same spot on Ruby's couch where Id spent the entire night. I looked like Id, aged 10 years overnight. Marcus and Ruby exchanged worried glances, and I knew they were thinking Id broken completely. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a new email from Kenneth's lawyer. The message was even more threatening than the first one. It stated that if I didn't sign the documents relinquishing all claims to family assets within 48 hours, they would pursue a formal restraining order against me. Additionally, they were prepared to file a lawsuit against me for harassment, defamation, and causing intentional emotional distress based on my behavior at the engagement party. The estimated legal fees to defend myself would be at least $50,000, money I absolutely did not have. They knew exactly how to back me into a corner. Even if I wanted to fight, I couldn't afford the legal battle. I would lose my apartment, probably my job, everything. I showed the email to Ruby, and I watched her face harden with anger. But when she started to argue that we should fight anyway, I cut her off. "I'm going to sign," I said flatly. "Ruby, I can't do this anymore. I don't have the strength. They've already won." Ruby grabbed my shoulders and made me look at her. "They haven't won anything yet," she insisted. "We have evidence. We have Marcus recordings. We can still fight this." But I was too broken, too defeated to believe her. "They'll destroy me in court," I said. "You heard Kenneth. They have resources I can't match. Even if we prove fraud eventually, the process will bankrupt me and ruin what's left of my reputation. It's not worth it." Ruby looked like she wanted to cry, but she's too strong for that. She just held my hands and pleaded with me not to give up. I spent that entire day in a fog of depression, barely responding when Ruby or Marcus tried to talk to me. I felt hollowed out, like every emotion had been scooped out and thrown away. I truly believed it was over, that Kenneth and Patricia had successfully destroyed me. That evening, when Marcus returned with new information he'd uncovered, I almost didn't listen. But he was so insistent, so urgent, that Ruby made me pay attention. Marcus had spent the day digging deeper into Graham Wellington's business empire, following financial trails and calling in favors from sources in the business world. What he discovered changed everything. Kenneth's relationship with Cassandra wasn't random or organic. Graham Wellington had specifically sought Kenneth out after learning about the trust fund left by our father. One of Graham's employees had done background research on Kenneth when he started working at the investment firm, and they discovered the substantial inheritance waiting to mature. Graham was in serious financial trouble. His real estate company was leveraged to the breaking point, hiding massive debts behind a facade of success. He desperately needed an infusion of cash to cover up fraud and bad investments. Marcus showed me bank records he'd obtained through questionable but legal means, documents that proved Graham had less than 2 months before creditors would discover he was essentially bankrupt. "That's when he sent Cassandra to seduce Kenneth," Marcus explained. "The entire romance was manufactured. Graham told his daughter to secure the engagement and make sure Kenneth got access to his sister's share of the inheritance. They need that money not for luxury or social climbing, but survival. If they don't get it, Graham Wellington will be investigated for fraud and probably go to prison." I listened to all of this, and something slowly shifted inside me. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something. A spark of anger that had been too crushed to feel before. Ruby watched me carefully, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "They're not winning because they're stronger than you, Diane. They're winning because they're willing to lie and cheat and manipulate. But you have something they don't. You have the truth." Marcus nodded agreement. "And truth is powerful when you know how to use it. We can expose all of this. We can make sure everyone knows what they really are." I thought about my father, about the man who worked double shifts and went without so his children would have opportunities he never had. I thought about how He'd feel seeing what Kenneth had become, how disappointed He'd be in both Kenneth and Patricia. My father had believed in integrity, in hard work, in taking care of family. He would be ashamed of them, but I realized he might be proud of me if I stood up and fought back. I looked at Ruby and Marcus. These two people who barely knew me compared to my blood family but who were willing to fight for me when my own mother wouldn't. I made a decision. "Tell me what we need to do," I said quietly. Ruby smiled for the first time in 24 hours. Ruby laid out our strategy with the precision of a military general planning a campaign. What we needed most was concrete documentation proving that Kenneth knew about the trust fund and had deliberately hidden it from me for years. Marcus' audio recordings from the party were good, but they could potentially be challenged in court or dismissed as taken out of context. We needed something indisputable, something that showed clear intent to defraud. "Kenneth keeps everything digital," I said slowly. "He's obsessive about documenting things for his work at the investment firm. If there's evidence, it'll be on his laptop." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "Does he keep his laptop somewhere we can access it?" I felt my stomach clench as I realized what they were suggesting. "My mother still lives in our childhood home," I said. "Kenneth stays there when he visits from his condo downtown. He usually leaves his laptop in the guest room where he sleeps." Ruby and Marcus exchanged a look. "Can you get into the house?" Ruby asked carefully. "I still have my key from when I lived there," I admitted. "Mom never asked for it back when I moved out 5 years ago. I don't think she even remembers I have it." Ruby's expression turned serious. "Diane, I need to be completely honest with you about the legal implications here. If we go into that house without permission, even with your key, it could potentially be considered trespassing since you don't live there anymore. If we access Kenneth's laptop without his permission, that's even more legally questionable. Any evidence we find might be inadmissible in court, and they could potentially press charges against us." I felt my brief spark of hope guttering out, but Marcus interrupted. "However," Ruby continued, as if he hadn't spoken, "if you're entering your childhood home, a place where you lived for years and still have a key, and you happen to find evidence of a crime being committed against you, that's a different situation. You're not breaking in. You're not stealing. You're discovering evidence of fraud." Marcus jumped in. "And I'll be outside as a witness to document that you had legitimate access and cause." Ruby cautioned us one more time about the risks, but I could see in her eyes that she thought this was our best shot. We spent the next 2 days preparing for what felt like a heist from a movie. Ruby coached me on what specific files to look for, how to copy them quickly, and what to do if anything went wrong. Marcus taught me how to use a high-capacity USB drive that could copy large amounts of data in minutes. We researched Patricia's schedule and discovered she visited her sister Aunt Helen every Sunday afternoon without fail, a routine Shed maintained for decades. That was our window. Sunday arrived with clear skies that felt inappropriately cheerful given what we were about to do. Ruby drove me to my childhood neighborhood, a modest area of small, single-family homes with neat lawns and older cars in driveways. Marcus followed in his own vehicle, parking a block away where he could see the house but wouldn't be obvious. Ruby parked around the corner, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at the house where I'd grown up. It looked exactly the same as it had when I left. The same beige siding and brown shutters, the same azalea bushes Dad had planted the year before he died. Being here hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated, bringing back memories of better times when we were actually a family. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. My hands shook as I walked up the familiar cracked sidewalk and climbed the 3 concrete steps to the front door. I pulled out my old key, and for a horrible moment I thought the locks had been changed after all. But the key slid in smoothly, turned with a familiar click, and the door opened. The house was empty and quiet in that particular way houses are when nobody's home. I called out anyway. "Mom? Kenneth? Anyone here?" Silence answered me. I moved through the living room, and it was like walking through a museum of my childhood. There was the couch where Dad and I used to watch baseball games together. There was the scratched coffee table where Kenneth and I did homework side by side. The kitchen where Mom taught me to bake cookies before grief made her distant and cold. Everything was the same, but I was completely different. I wasn't the girl who'd left this house 5 years ago. That girl had been naive and trusting. The woman standing here now had been betrayed and hardened by it. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my footsteps creaking on the old wood in a way that sent shivers down my spine. The guest room where Kenneth stayed was at the end of the hallway, and I pushed the door open with a sense of unreality. There on the desk was Kenneth's laptop, expensive and sleek, left open but asleep. I sat down at the desk and touched the trackpad. The screen lit up with a password prompt. I tried several combinations, my heart sinking with each failed attempt. Then I remembered that Kenneth had always used Dad's birthday for everything because he said it was the one date he'd never forget. I typed in the numbers, and the laptop unlocked. I was in. I opened Kenneth's email application and started searching for keywords. Trust, inheritance, Diane, father, estate. What I found was so much worse than it imagined. There were emails between Kenneth and Patricia going back 3 full years, to right around the time the trust fund would have matured. The early emails were Kenneth and Patricia discussing whether to tell me about the money at all. Patricia had argued they should keep it secret until they could figure out how to minimize my share legally. Kenneth had agreed enthusiastically, saying I didn't deserve an equal split because I'd chosen a low-paying career, while Head worked hard to become successful. Their entitlement was breathtaking. Later emails showed them actively planning how to manipulate me. One from Patricia read, "If we can keep Diane struggling financially, she'll be too desperate and grateful for any help to question where money comes from or doesn't come from. She's always been trusting to a fault." Kenneth's response, "Agreed. The longer we wait, the more normal it will seem that there was no inheritance. Eventually, she'll forget to even ask about it." I copied these files to the USB drive with shaking hands, rage and hurt warring inside me. There were more emails showing Kenneth had been in contact with Graham Wellington for over a year. Graham had written, "My daughter understands what's required. Once she secures the engagement, you'll need to move quickly to get your sister's signature on the settlement papers. The money needs to be liquid and accessible within 60 days. Kenneth had responded, "Cassandra has been perfect. I'm completely convinced by her act, so I'm sure everyone else is too. Once the engagement is official, I'll pressure Diane to sign away her rights. After that, how do you want to split the funds?" Graham's reply made my blood boil. 70-30 split in our favor seems reasonable given the risk my family is taking on your reputation. Plus, we'll need most of it to cover certain business expenses. Kenneth had agreed without even arguing. He was so eager to marry into wealth that Head accepted getting cheated on his own scheme to cheat me. I found the actual trust fund documents buried in a folder labeled Taxes. My father had set up a trust that would mature when his youngest child turned 25, with the explicit instruction that it be divided equally between his children to give them security and opportunity. The total amount was $875,000, even more than Ruby had estimated. Kenneth had turned 25 7 years ago, and I'd turned 25 3 years ago. We should have each received our shares back then, $437,000 apiece. Instead, Kenneth had used his financial connections to quietly roll the entire trust into an account under his control, forging documents that suggested I'd already been paid out when I hadn't. He'd stolen nearly $500,000 from me, and my mother had helped him do it. The USB drive was copying files, the progress bar crawling across the screen at an agonizing pace. I was at 85% when I heard a sound that made my heart stop, a car door slamming outside. I rushed to the window and looked down at the driveway. Patricia's car was there. She was home early. I heard the front door open and my mother's voice calling out uncertainly, "Kenneth? Are you here early?" I looked at the laptop screen. 90%. Patricia's footsteps were on the stairs now, climbing toward the second floor. I willed the progress bar to move faster. 95%. The footsteps were in the hallway, approaching the guest room. 98%. I could see the doorknob starting to turn. 99%. The door opened, and Patricia stood there, frozen in shock at seeing me sitting at Kenneth's desk. 100%. The file transfer completed. I yanked the USB drive out and closed the laptop in one swift motion. Diane? Patricia's voice was a mixture of shock and rapidly building fury. What are you doing in my house? I stood up, gripping the USB drive so tightly in my pocket that the edges dug into my palm. Getting what I came for, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Patricia's eyes darted to the laptop, and understanding dawned on her face. You went through Kenneth's computer? She demanded, her voice rising. That's theft. That's illegal. You have no right. I found my voice, found my strength, found the anger I'd been too beaten down to feel before. I have every right to know what my father left me, I said firmly. Every right to see proof that you and Kenneth have been stealing from me for years. Patricia's expression cycled rapidly through shock, fear, anger, and then settled on aggression. She grabbed her phone from her purse. I'm calling the police, she said. I'm calling Kenneth. You're not going to get away with this. I started moving toward the door, but Patricia stepped into my path, blocking the exit. Give me that USB drive, she demanded, holding out her hand. Whatever you took from that computer, it's Kenneth's property. Hand it over right now. I met her eyes. These eyes I'd looked into my whole life, eyes that were supposed to love me and protect me, and I saw a stranger. No, I said simply. That evidence proves you committed fraud. There's a difference between theft and recovering stolen property. Patricia's face twisted with rage and something else that looked almost like panic. You're going to ruin everything, she hissed. Kenneth has worked so hard to build a life with these people. The Wellingtons can open doors for him that we never could. Why are you so selfish? Why can't you just let him have this opportunity? Because he stole from me, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Because you both betrayed me, and then tried to gaslight me into thinking I was crazy for questioning it. Because Dad left that money for both of us, and Kenneth decided he deserved all of it. Patricia actually looked insulted by my accusations, as if I was being unreasonable. We were protecting the family assets, she said, keeping them from being wasted on your frivolous lifestyle choices. That money could have changed my life, I said quietly. It could have paid for college. Could have given me security. Could have let me have choices instead of just surviving, and you took it away without even telling me it existed. Patricia moved to physically block the bedroom door. You're not leaving with that drive, she said. I'll call the police right now and tell them you broke into my house and stole Kenneth's property. I moved fast, pushing past her with more force than I'd ever used with my mother before. She stumbled backward, and I ran for the stairs. Get back here! Patricia was screaming behind me, her voice shrill and desperate. Kenneth! Kenneth! She was here! She went through your computer. But Kenneth wasn't home. I ran through the living room and burst out the front door. Patricia chased me onto the porch, still screaming. Ruby's car was already moving, screeching to a stop in front of the house. I dove into the passenger seat. Drive! I shouted. Ruby hit the accelerator, and we sped away. In the rearview mirror, I could see Patricia standing in the middle of the street, still screaming, her phone pressed to her ear. I clutched the USB drive in my hand, like it was the most precious thing in the world, because right now, it was. This tiny piece of plastic held the proof of everything Kenneth and Patricia had done. It held my vindication, my justice, my chance to finally make them pay for what they'd taken from me. Back at Ruby's office, we plugged the USB drive into her computer and went through every file I'd copied. Ruby's expression grew darker with each document she read, each email that revealed another layer of betrayal. Marcus verified that the audio recordings Head captured at the engagement party matched perfectly with the written evidence in Kenneth's emails. We had them! We had everything! Ruby confirmed we had more than enough to pursue criminal fraud charges against both Kenneth and Patricia, and potentially against Graham Wellington for conspiracy to commit fraud. But I need to warn you, Ruby said seriously. They're going to come at you hard. Kenneth's lawyer will file charges for illegal access to his computer. They'll try to make you look like the criminal here. We need to act fast and decisively. Marcus had an idea that was bold and risky. I can publish the full investigation in the newspaper tomorrow morning, he said. If everything is already public, if everyone already knows what they did, it'll be much harder for them to spin the narrative or make you disappear quietly. Ruby liked the plan but wanted something more. She would file emergency legal motions first thing Monday morning to freeze the trust fund accounts and prevent Kenneth from moving the money. But both of them looked at me, waiting for my input. What do you want to happen? Ruby asked gently. This is your justice, Diane. How do you want it to play out? I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to just let Ruby and Marcus handle everything, to hide while they fought my battles. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger since that night at the engagement party, wanted something different. I want to face them, I said. I want to look Kenneth and Patricia in the eyes and tell them I know everything. I want them to know they didn't break me. Ruby smiled, fierce and proud. Then let's set up a meeting. Using her legal credentials, Ruby contacted Kenneth's lawyer and requested an emergency family mediation session. She made it sound like I was ready to settle, ready to sign the papers and make everything go away. Kenneth's lawyer agreed immediately, probably relieved that this messy situation was finally going to be resolved. They set the meeting for that very evening at the lawyer's office, a neutral location where everyone would feel safe. When Kenneth arrived with Patricia, Cassandra, and Graham Wellington in tow, they all looked smug and confident. Kenneth was already smiling like head won. Patricia wouldn't even look at me, her face set in a mask of cold disapproval. Cassandra examined her perfect manicure, looking bored by the whole proceeding. Graham Wellington checked his expensive watch impatiently, clearly annoyed at having his evening interrupted. They all sat on one side of the conference table, a united front of wealth and power. Ruby, Marcus, and I sat on the other side. Kenneth's lawyer, a smooth man in an expensive suit, started the meeting. I understand Miss Morrison is ready to sign the settlement documents and put this unfortunate situation behind us all. He slid papers across the table toward me. Kenneth leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed. Ready to stop this foolishness and move on with your life? He asked me condescendingly. Ruby spoke before I could. Actually, we're not here to sign anything. We're here to discuss the fraud you've been committing for the past 3 years. She slid printed copies of Kenneth's emails across the table. Kenneth's confident expression faltered as he recognized his own words. Where did you get those? He demanded. His lawyer picked up the papers and started reading, his professional composure cracking. From your laptop, I said calmly. The one you left at Mom's house. The one with all the evidence of how you stole my inheritance. Patricia gasped audibly. You went through his private property? That's illegal, Ruby cut her off smoothly. Your son has been committing fraud, hiding a trust fund worth $875,000 that should have been split equally with your daughter. She slid more documents across the table, financial records showing the trust fund and Kenneth's manipulation of it. Graham Wellington tried to bluster his way out. This is absurd, he said loudly. We don't have to sit here and listen to these baseless accusations. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice calm and measured. Then perhaps you'd prefer if I publish my full investigation into your real estate fraud in tomorrow morning's newspaper? He slid his own stack of documents across the table, detailed records of Graham's financial crimes, his bankruptcies hidden behind shell companies, his desperate need for Kenneth's money to cover up his failing empire. Graham's face went from red to white in seconds. Cassandra, who'd been pretending disinterest, suddenly focused on the documents. Daddy, what is this? She asked, her voice uncertain. What is he talking about? It became clear in that moment that Cassandra hadn't known the full extent of what her father had been planning. She'd known she was supposed to charm Kenneth, knew the family wanted access to his money, but she hadn't realized her father was using her to cover up criminal fraud. Kenneth started sweating, his eyes darting between the documents and his lawyer's increasingly concerned expression. This is all taken out of context, he insisted weakly. These emails don't mean what you think they mean. I found my voice. found the strength had been building over these past days. "Which part is out of context, Kenneth?" I asked. "The part where you called me too trusting? The part where you said I didn't deserve an equal share? The part where you planned to keep me poor and desperate so I wouldn't question where Dad's money went? Or maybe the part where you agreed to let the Wellingtons take 70% of my inheritance in exchange for letting you marry their daughter?" Patricia tried to defend them both. "We were protecting family assets," she insisted, "making sure the money was used wisely instead of being wasted." Ruby's voice cut through the room like a knife. "You were stealing from your daughter. You forged documents suggesting she'd already received her share of the trust when she never saw a penny. That's not protection. That's theft." Kenneth's lawyer quietly told Kenneth something that made Kenneth's face drain of color. "These emails show clear intent to defraud," the lawyer said. "This is very, very bad, Kenneth." Then the villain alliance started to crumble from within. Kenneth, panicked and desperate to save himself, turned on Graham. "It was his idea," Kenneth blurted out. "Graham came to me with this whole plan. He said we could all benefit if I got access to the full trust." Graham stood up angrily, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're pinning this on me? You were the one who jumped at the chance to cheat your own sister." Cassandra suddenly understood the full scope of what had been done to her. "You made me seduce him for money?" she asked her father, her voice small and hurt. "You used me as bait in your scheme?" "The engagement is obviously over," Ruby said calmly, watching the chaos unfold. "Cassandra can avoid charges if she agrees to testify as a witness against her father and Kenneth." Cassandra didn't hesitate for even a second. "I'll testify," she said immediately, standing up and moving away from her father. "I didn't know about the fraud. I thought we were just helping Kenneth access his own money." Kenneth turned on Patricia desperately. "Mom, you said this would work. You promised no one would ever find out." Patricia's face was a mask of confusion and denial. "I did this for you," she said shrilly. "You said you wanted a better life. You said you needed this opportunity. Everything was unraveling, and I watched it with a sense of cold satisfaction." Ruby laid out the terms calmly, like she was discussing a business contract rather than the destruction of my family. "Here is what's going to happen. Kenneth and Patricia will relinquish all claims to Diane's portion of the trust fund. Graham Wellington will be investigated for fraud, and Kenneth will be charged as an accessory if he doesn't cooperate fully. Patricia will sign a statement admitting everything she did to help conceal the trust fund. In exchange for full cooperation and restitution, we might recommend reduced charges." Kenneth's lawyer urged him to accept the terms immediately. "This is your best option," he said quietly. "If you fight this, you're looking at serious prison time." Graham Wellington tried to storm out of the conference room, but Marcus called after him. "The police are waiting in the lobby," Marcus said calmly. "I called them before the meeting. They have warrants." Graham was arrested as he exited the building, his furious protests echoing down the hallway. Kenneth broke down completely, his confident mask shattering. "Diane, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to forgive me. We're family." I looked at my brother, this person I'd loved my entire life, who'd protected me when we were children and then betrayed me as adults, and I felt nothing but cold emptiness. "You stopped being my family when you decided I was worth less than money," I said quietly. Patricia sat in stunned silence, tears running down her face, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done and what she'd lost. Ruby presented the settlement documents she'd prepared. Kenneth and Patricia would transfer my full share of the trust, $437,000. They would also pay an additional $100,000 in damages for emotional distress and 3 years of lost investment opportunity. Kenneth would publicly admit to the fraud in a recorded statement. Patricia would sign an affidavit confirming her role in concealing the trust fund. And most importantly, they would both agree to stay away from me permanently unless I initiated contact. Kenneth's lawyer urged him to sign. Kenneth's hands shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at me one more time, searching for any sign of forgiveness or mercy in my face. He found none. He signed. Patricia signed last, her tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink slightly. Ruby collected the signed documents and stood up. "We're done here," she said. "Diane, let's go." I stood to leave, gathering my things slowly. Kenneth called out behind me. "We're still family," he said desperately. "Blood is blood, that has to mean something." I turned back one final time to look at him and Patricia. "No," I said firmly. "Family doesn't do what you did. Family doesn't steal and lie and gaslight. Family doesn't make you feel worthless so they can take what's yours. I have real family now, and it's not you." I looked at Ruby and Marcus, the people who'd fought for me when my blood relatives had fought against me. We walked out of that conference room together, leaving Kenneth and Patricia sitting in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't look back. 3 months have passed since that confrontation in the lawyer's conference room, and I'm sitting in my new apartment, a bright 2-bedroom place with actual sunlight and space to breathe. I furnished it simply but comfortably with a small portion of my settlement money, buying a real couch instead of the hand-me-down I'd had before, a proper bed, bookshelves for the collection I'm slowly building. The rest of the money is invested wisely thanks to Ruby's guidance, growing in accounts that will give me security for years to come. I kept my job at the community center because that work brings me meaning and purpose in ways that money never could. But now I also volunteer 2 evenings a week teaching financial literacy classes, helping young people understand estate planning, inheritance rights, and how to protect themselves from family fraud. I use my own story anonymously in these classes, and I watch recognition dawn in people's faces as they realize they're not alone in having been betrayed by those closest to them. Marcus' investigation was published as a front-page story that ran for 3 days, detailing not just my case but the entire web of fraud surrounding Graham Wellington's real estate empire. Graham was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His company collapsed, revealing he'd defrauded dozens of investors over the years. Kenneth accepted a plea deal that included 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent record of fraud that destroyed his career in finance. He lost his job at the investment firm and now works in a low-level administrative position somewhere. Cassandra moved to another state entirely, wanting distance from the scandal and her father's crimes. She sent me a letter about a month ago, a genuine apology for her role even though she hadn't known the full truth. I appreciated the gesture, though I didn't write back. Some bridges are burned beyond repair. Patricia lost the family house when Kenneth could no longer help her pay the mortgage. She moved to a small apartment across town and hasn't tried to contact me since that day in the lawyer's office. Kenneth has sent several emails and text messages begging for forgiveness, telling me he's changed, insisting we should try to rebuild our relationship. I delete them without reading past the first line. I'm not ready to forgive, and I may never be. That's okay too. Ruby and Marcus have become my real family, the people I celebrate holidays with and call when I need advice. Ruby still handles my legal matters, though now it's more about managing my investments than fighting fraud cases. We have dinner together every Wednesday night, a standing date where we cook something elaborate and laugh about our weeks. Marcus is dating someone he met while covering the Wellington story, a paralegal named James, who makes him smile in ways I've never seen before. Marcus credits my courage with helping him break the biggest story of his career. Though I think he's being generous, he would have found the corruption eventually. I just happened to be the catalyst. I've been in therapy since the settlement, working through the trauma of family betrayal with a kind woman who specializes in family estrangement. She's helping me understand that I wasn't responsible for their choices, that I couldn't have prevented what happened, no matter what I did differently. Some days are harder than others. I still have dreams where I'm back at that engagement party being dragged out by security. I still feel a pang of grief when I see families laughing together and realize I'll never have that again. My therapist says grief and growth can exist simultaneously, that I'm allowed to mourn the family I thought I had while still moving forward into the life I'm building. I started a small nonprofit with part of my settlement money, an organization that provides free legal consultation, referrals, and support groups for young people who've been financially exploited by family members. We've helped 43 people so far, connecting them with lawyers who do pro bono work, and teaching them how to protect themselves and recover what was stolen. The work is healing for me in ways I didn't expect. Every person I help feels like a small victory over what Kenneth and Patricia tried to do to me. One Saturday afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my father is buried, something I hadn't done in over 5 years because it hurt too much. I brought flowers and sat on the grass beside his headstone, and I told him everything. "I think you'd be disappointed in Kenneth," I said quietly, my hand resting on the sun-warmed stone. "He turned into someone you wouldn't recognize. But I hope you'd be proud of me for fighting back, for not letting them erase me." A gentle breeze moved through the cemetery trees, rustling the leaves in a way that felt almost like an answer. I sat there for a long time, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in months. I realized I no longer needed Kenneth or Patricia's approval or acknowledgement. I knew the truth. And I'd saved myself. That was enough. As I walked back to my car, Ruby called to tell me that Kenneth had reached out through his lawyer again, requesting an in-person meeting to apologize properly. I stood there in the cemetery parking lot, considering it for a long moment. Maybe someday, I told Ruby honestly. But not today. I'm not ready to forgive him, and I might never be. That's okay. Forgiveness isn't required for healing, and I'm healing just fine without it. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my new apartment, the first time I'd had people over since moving in. Ruby brought her girlfriend Samantha, Marcus brought James, and 2 women from my support group came, nervous but grateful for the invitation. We ate pasta that I'd cooked myself, nothing fancy but made with care. We laughed and shared stories and toasted to second chances with cheap wine and mismatched glasses. This is family, I thought, looking around my table at these people who saw my worth and celebrated it. Not blood, but choice. People who chose to stand beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. Later that night, after everyone had left and I'd cleaned up the dishes, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights, twinkling in the darkness. I thought about that text message that had started everything. Kenneth telling me I would shame him, that I wasn't good enough. I thought about how close I came to believing him, to accepting that I was worthless because my own family said I was. But I fought back, even when it seemed impossible, even when I wanted to give up. The lesson I learned wasn't really about money or revenge, though both of those things happened. The real lesson was about knowing my own value regardless of what anyone else believed. It was about choosing myself even when that meant losing everyone I thought was family. It was about understanding that real family sees your worth and respects it, that real loyalty flows both ways. I picked up my journal, something my therapist had encouraged me to keep, and I wrote, "I thought family meant blood. I thought loyalty meant accepting whatever they did to me. But real family sees your worth. Real loyalty goes both ways. I don't need forgiveness from people who never respected me. I need respect from people who genuinely love me. And I finally have that." I closed the journal and looked at the photograph on my bookshelf, a picture from tonight's dinner party that Samantha had insisted on taking. In it, I'm surrounded by Ruby, Marcus, James, Samantha, and the 2 women from my support group, all of us laughing at something someone had said. My smile in that photo is genuine, unforced, the smile of someone who's happy and knows she's exactly where she belongs. This is my family now, built on honesty and mutual respect and genuine care. Not perfect, but real. My phone buzzed with another email from Kenneth, subject line reading, "Please read this one." I deleted it without opening it. Some bridges are meant to burn, not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. I'm not the same woman who received that cruel text message 3 months ago. I'm stronger, wiser, more careful about who I let into my life. But I'm also more open to real connection, more willing to trust people who've actually earned it. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, that protecting your peace is necessary, that you can grieve the family you wanted while building the family you need. As I prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not pure happiness exactly, that will take more time to fully develop, but a quiet, steady knowledge that I'm going to be okay, better than okay. I survived the worst betrayal imaginable. fought back when everyone expected me to crumble, and won. Not because I destroyed them, though they certainly face consequences for their actions, but because I refused to let their cruelty define my worth. The last thought before sleep comes: I am enough. I always was. Tomorrow I'll wake up and continue building this new life, one day at a time, one choice at a time, surrounded by people who actually deserve my loyalty. And that's more valuable than any inheritance could ever be. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Drop your story in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your experiences might help someone else who's going through something similar. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength you didn't know you had. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're worth fighting for, even when the people who should love them say otherwise. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself. You deserve respect, honesty, and genuine love. Never settle for less. Take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I'll see you in the next video.